welcome to Bulls, Bears, and Bill, a weekly show on the financial markets brought to you by Dalton Community TV and Bill Schmick of Onota Partners. And I'm Barbara Schmick, also of Onota Partners. Each week, Bill will share with us why the markets did what they did and where they're going in the weeks and months ahead. Stocks, bonds, options, commodities, currencies, crypto, you name it, it's Bill's world. Bill spends his days in front of several computer screens digesting world events, checking both foreign and domestic markets, trading up a storm, while figuring out how the latest post from hundreds of sources will impact markets. Bill has been trading and investing in global markets for many years. He's worked for decades on Wall Street for some of the largest and well-known firms in the country. He has traveled the world several times over, advised some of the greatest names in the business, and witnessed many of the events that have shaped markets today. Bill has also been an investment advisor managing individual clients' money and advising them on all sorts of financial issues, from retirement and estate planning to affording health care to putting their kids through school. In his spare time, he writes 2 columns a week for several media and newspaper organizations throughout the country. Locally, you can read his columns in the Berkshire Eagle and on iBerkshires.com. And before we start the show, I just wanted to say to you, Bill, my favorite Marine in the world, happy 250th birthday to the Marine Corps today.
Well, thank you, and Semper Fi for you fellow jarheads out there. Welcome back, viewers, to the second week in November. Actually, it's November the 10th. It's Monday, and already we've got some changes. Just before we arrived, the Senate actually passed a bill to reopen the government. Now, and the markets are up. When we left, the S&P was up over 1%, the NASDAQ over 2%. Et cetera, et cetera. And it now goes to the House of Representatives because there are some slight changes to the language and what's going to happen. And the House of Representatives have to agree to do this or not. And then the bill goes to the president if they agree. Otherwise, back to the Senate for more negotiations. My take on this, okay. For the last 2 weeks, I was telling you that what was going to bring the two sides together was flights in the month of November leading up until Thanksgiving. And as you know, over the weekend, the 2,000, 3,000 flights have been canceled. The Department of Transportation has said as the shutdown continues, more and more flights will be canceled. And basically what's happened is for the first time since this historically long shutdown has occurred, a lot of Americans are becoming inconvenienced. And as I wrote in my column, I'm quite sure that last week what congressmen and senators were seeing was an increase in the number of emails and telephone calls to them from disgruntled business and consumers. So, as I said, when the heat rose, it did rise, that at that time Congress would get together and everything that they wanted would go out the window because what Americans care about is their own inconvenience. And I'd like to say that SNAP benefits that were up for renewal, or not renewal, but funding or not, may be something that tugs at most of our heartstrings. But frankly, it's not inconvenience for Americans, and we're quite selfish in that way. So, what's happened? Well, the 8 Democrats that basically caved in and joined Republicans in the Senate to pass it, 6 of the 8 are not up for re-election this coming, next year, and 2 are retiring. Okay, that's politics. And so much for standing on one's principles. Now, what I could read that happened that was some kind of change was simply that the Obamacare insurance premiums, which are destined at the end of the year to grow up dramatically because Congress has pulled the funding for for the premiums, the additional money that they had given people on that program for the insurance premiums. Well, those insurance premiums are going to go up, but now the idea is that the government will just send them money and they can decide whether they're going to use that money in order to reduce their insurance premiums or not. How that would work, I have no idea. I'm sure Congress doesn't know how that, or the Senate surely doesn't know how that would work either. But it was a face-saving maneuver, I guess, for both parties in the face of the real trigger, which was the reduction in air flights coming into Thanksgiving. So next it goes to the House of Representatives. I'm sure that some of the House of Representatives will say no deal, or we're not going to change it, because they're going to have to change the wording and so forth to accommodate this way of in healthcare that the Senate has devised. Well, whether they believe it or not, what's going to happen, I think, is President Trump is going to say, pass it, and the House of Representatives are going to do what their leader says, and that's about it. And they'll probably do that either tomorrow, Tuesday, or Wednesday. We'll see how long it takes to get some of the disgruntled Congress people back on board, so to speak. So the market is basically rallying on the relief that the government shutdown is going to come over. How long that actually keeps the market up is questionable. We'll see. What is important from the economic point of view, that if they do reopen the government, we can expect this week to get some information on the Consumer Price Index on Thursday. That's when it's scheduled. Or is it Wednesday? Thursday or Wednesday. And the Producer Price Index, which is scheduled for Friday. So that'll be the first time in a month that we've got any inkling of what's going on as far as inflation. That's today's news, so to speak.
For the moment.
For the moment.
Until we get back home and see
Yeah.
something different. So it might be a happy holiday after all for people who are traveling. Thanks, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about tariffs. Will the Supreme Court declare Trump's tariffs illegal?
It's leaning that way. Okay? I mean, the opening arguments were met with a lot of skepticism from most of the justices, even the really hardcore conservative justices. And it comes down to one issue. Is a tariff a tax or is it not? The government, as you know, and Donald Trump, as you know, have insisted from the outset that tariffs are not taxes. Just about every economist in the world insists that they are taxes. And as far as you and I are concerned, when tariffs cause the price of goods and services to go higher, we pay more. I don't care if you call it a tariff or a tax, it's additional money out of our pocket. And the government is collecting that money. So if you're paying more, whatever it is, however much more, and the government is pocketing that additional increase, there is no difference between taxing you and tariffing you, other than semantics. But here's the deal. Both Trump's legal advisors, as well as his administration, knew from the outset that a tariff is a tax. They also expected it to go to the Supreme Court. So from day one, they insisted that it was not a tax, okay, on Americans. Now, I believe that looking back and now seeing the Supreme Court and their decision, if at any time during the last 9 months, Trump or anyone in his administration called a tariff a tax, it was over, just simply over. As it stands, I think that Supreme Court will come down on the fact that it is a tax and that taxes can only be introduced by Congress, not by the president. Okay, now there's a lot of talk about, therefore, 90 billion about of the 160 or 70 billion dollars of tariffs that have been collected will have to be refunded. Okay, will that really happen? I'm not that sure that the Supreme Court is going to go for that. I think that what they're going to do is say, yeah, the tariffs are illegal, or in some shape, way, or form deny the president. I don't know if they'll say illegal or not. And so they'll say that these tariffs have to go through Congress because Congress is the proper authority to raise tariffs. Something like that, okay, but I don't see this as going to be a wipeout for the administration. I think it's going to be more of a slap in the hands kind of thing. Go back and get Congress to approve and then reissue the tariffs sort of thing. And as far as the refunds, I don't think so. But we'll see. The Supreme Court isn't in a void. They know this country. They know what a refund would entail. It's been done before, but not in this size. Never 90, $100 billion worth. And they know that that's going to be disruptive, not only to the administration, but also to the economy. And the impact it will have on other countries is questionable as well. Now, my own take is, yes, the Supreme Court may basically say, go through Congress. And the White House is already doing that. Actually, they've had a plan B in line since the first federal court said, no, the taxes, your tariffs are illegal because you used the wrong instrument, the Emergency Powers Act. You can't do that. Okay, since that point, what Trump and the White House has been doing is preparing investigations and all the necessary ingredients for his requests to go into Congress to pass the same sort of tariffs. Not as high and not for as long a duration. I think one of the resolutions said the tariffs are capped at 15% and 180 or 190 days maximum. However, knowing the control that Trump has on Congress, both Republican House and Republican Senate, I'm sure they'll rubber stamp his tariffs. I'm not that sure that they will go through easily, in the sense that there are a lot of senators and congressmen in districts that are really being hurt by tariffs. So I suspect there will be a lot of juggling in this, which will be time consuming. But I think economists say if Trump went through the way the tariff process the way he should have done, that 90% of the tariffs will probably ultimately be repassed by Congress.
Okay, didn't I read on Truth Social this weekend, Trump said he was going to refund every American $2,000?
We're in the money, we're in the money. This reminds me, if you remember, the COVID stimulus checks, okay? Mm-hmm. They were, I think, around $2,000. And if you also recall, they all had Donald Trump's name on them, okay? It's interesting that you may not know this, but during the election process, the presidential election process, a great number of Americans actually voted for Donald Trump because of that stimulus program, that stimulus check. Even though the check was passed after Trump was out of office, it was a Biden initiative, okay? But Trump was still in the office and he could pass the checks, write the checks. It was after the new year, but before Biden became president. So anyway, the point is that after last week's elections, I think it was 2 governors and a mayor, 3 governors and a mayor. Anyway, the point was that the Democrats really gained ground, okay? And the reason why was because of the concern that most Americans have about the affordability. Affordability, meaning they can't make ends meet. Now, if you recall, you probably don't, that during the election campaign, Donald Trump used the word affordability a cajillion times. That soon as he was elected, inflation was going to drop to 0 again. That gas prices were going to come down to here. That Jesus Christ was going to cut the rate of inflation. Whatever it took, okay? It resonated with Americans. It still does. Because what's happened under his administration is that inflation continues to rise. Maybe not at the same pace, but if you've read my column on things like beef, you know that beef is at prices that are historically high and probably not coming down. So, with what does this have to do with a $2,000 check? Affordability. Okay, the first thing that Donald Trump does after he looks at the election totals is say, affordability. People may think that my tariffs are taxes. How am I going to get out this? I'll send them a check. $2,000. That'll ensure that anybody out there who thinks that tariffs are taxes, well, I'm going to give your money back. And in a statement on Truth Social, I think it's a really political mistake, he actually called some of us fools, okay? That kind of makes me think of Hillary Clinton during that election where she trashed Americans that were voting for Trump. So Americans don't like to be called fools. And the majority of Americans believe that tariffs are taxes. And I think that the president does too. Otherwise, why would he be sending or thinking of sending you $2,000? Now wait, is this really going to occur? Well, today, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, said, well, yeah, we could do that, but that's going to be a tax cut if we do it. So don't be waiting for a $2,000 check in the mail. And if this were to occur, it isn't going to occur now. It's probably going to occur just before the midterm elections. And we all know why.
Very clever. Okay. Investors seem spooked by the latest October read on jobs. I thought with the government shutdown, employment data is no longer available.
That's true. And so what we've all been doing is looking for it's not a lot, but there are some private firms that sell data on income, retail sales, things like that, okay? So one of them, it's called Challenger, came out this last week, and they reported that the number of layoffs, okay, among corporations skyrocketed over 100 and some percent. The lowest number, the highest number of layoffs in 1 month, October, since 2003. Now, whether or not that number is accurate or not, given that we have a void in government data, that shocked a lot of Wall Streeters. So as a result of that, they dumped the market on that. Now, if the government does reopen, we'll hopefully get some employment numbers and income numbers that might add to that or subtract to that. Now, the other thing is that we all know that one of the problems with employment has been that immigrants, because of Donald Trump's immigrant policy, are hiding. They're not going to work, okay? Or they're not trying to get jobs because they don't want to be deported. And even immigrants that are legal and here are not showing up at the jobs, their own jobs, because ICE is grabbing them as soon as they come in. You know, it's unconditional. In fact, it's racist if you believe it, because if you have dark skin or you talk funny or have an accent, the chances are you're going to be stopped by ICE, and unless you have all your immigration papers on you, you're probably going to end up in a detention center. And by the time you get out, that's another week or two disruption in your income, because you're not going to be able to go to work. And this is happening constantly. So the issue with the Challenger data is this had nothing to do with immigration. This is simply people that had a job, that weren't immigrants, and suddenly they're being laid off. So that really concerned people. So we'll see what happens. I guess if the silver lining in that is that if unemployment is rising, then that'll pretty much put a check mark against another interest rate cut in December. We'll see.
Let's talk about AI.
Oh.
It seems that suddenly buy everything that hints at AI involvement is no longer the trend. What happened?
Well, no longer the trend last week. As we saw, as you probably know by now, that last week we had 2 rough days, okay? And I think the total decline for the NASDAQ was 4%, 5%, and the S&P was down probably 2.5 or 3%. Not anything more than a hiccup, but nonetheless, what took the worst hits were anything that had AI into it. And now, AI, depending on who you are, it's either in a bubble or approaching a bubble, or that's it. And the froth was crazy. So you don't really need a reason to sell and take profits in a stock that's up 200 or 300%. Okay, and the AI stocks were all like that. So when there was a decline in the market, what's going to decline the most? The stocks that had the most profit in them for the year, and that was the AI stocks. So the media basically said, "Oh, here's why have investors suddenly turned on AI?" Well, I don't know if they have or not. My explanation was, you take profits in the stocks that you have gained the most in, and that's what's happened. Now, the bear case on AI is that there's a lot of money being spent on AI, a lot of money, trillions of dollars, and it's more and more companies are doing it, investing in it. The problem with it is that there's been no return on that capital invested. And this didn't happen just this year. AI investing started out 2 years ago in the mega trillions of dollars, and more money is being poured in, and there's nothing coming back on your profit line. Now, you would think, therefore, that at some point in the future, that you would expect to see some profits out of that, and that is going to happen. But I don't think it's not going to happen this year, and it probably won't happen next year. And so the bear case is that investors aren't going to wait 2 or 3 or 4 more years and keep bidding up stocks. They're going to start taking profits in them and sit back and see what's happened. Another indication that worries investors is the fact that in that Challenger report, you would think given that the AI industry and infrastructure is just getting started, meaning building factories and software programs and data centers and all of that. That's supposed to be happening right now. But there was no indication of an increase in any of the jobs that you would expect hiring in order to build out AI. In fact, they lost jobs. So that was another concern. If AI is so hot and everybody's rushing to build all of these investment factories and so forth, where's the meat? Where's the numbers? Where's the employment? And it wasn't there. So we'll see. I think either case, I would like to see, and I will probably see, a pullback in the whole AI segment, whether it's this moment or it happens at the end of the year or beginning of next year. It's coming at some point.
Okay. So I thought November and December were great months for the stock market. November has certainly not been great so far. Does this seasonality factor really work? And what is the seasonality factor?
Well, the seasonality factor is that historically, certain months of the year, stocks do better than others, okay? The worst months of the year are October and September. The best months of the year are supposed to be November and December, okay? So, we're in the 10th. So the first week in November, bingo! Stocks are down 3%, 5%, right out of the door, okay? So what does that do to seasonality? Now, September and October, two very negative months, both were up. So what's going on? Well, first of all, seasonality doesn't work all the time and every year. And basically, if there's something going on that's unusual, either on a geographic basis or an economic basis or a policy basis, something different, well then that kind of thing trumps seasonality. Okay. Think about this year. History has been turned on its head. Okay. For the first time in over 100 years, we have huge tariffs, historically high tariffs. Okay.
Right.
That definitely would impact seasonality. Okay. You have the AI explosion. That's another reason. Historically, the last time anything like this happened in the investing markets was back in the .com internet bubble, okay? And that was in the year 2000. So that was 25 years ago. So again, AI is history making. And then finally, the policies on immigration. We haven't had these kinds of changes in immigration policy since 1933. So each one of those things is enough to turn history and seasonality on its head. Now, saying that, okay, the first week of November was down, but as we walked in today, all the markets are up 1-2%. So they've already taken back or recouped at least half of last week's losses. Now, in my columns, I've been writing that I expect November to be volatile. What does volatile mean? It doesn't just mean selling. It also means like days like today, okay? What I mean is the volatility is on the upside and the downside. The upside and the downside. That's what I think we're experiencing and will continue to experience. So today's Monday. I figured maybe the House of Representatives agrees with the president and passes the opening of the government. We celebrate for another day or two in the markets, and then there's what? Earnings are all over. We have that done. Okay, maybe we go down again. Maybe we retest the lows we did last week, and then we go back up again. That's volatility, and that's the kind of movement I expect to see in November.
And what's the prognosis on consumer spending in the holidays? You wrote a column about that last week.
Happy holidays.
Here he goes.
You notice What happened to Thanksgiving? Go into the supermarket. It's all Christmas stuff. Go into the department store. It's all Christmas. What happened to Thanksgiving? Okay. Well, the holidays, including Thanksgiving and now Christmas, have become a massive marketing deal. All right. And it actually begins even before Halloween. So, okay. Now, Goldman Sachs, among others, on the tariff front, argued that up until now, corporations have swallowed 66% of all the tariff increases that we've had so far, and consumers the rest. Now, now the thinking is that corporations have had enough. They're not going to absorb any more of the tariffs. They're going to pass 70% of the tariff increases on to you and me, just in time for the holidays. Okay? It's not a done deal. We'll have to see if they do or they don't. And then, of course, we talked about the Supreme Court. All right? I don't think that if consumers are hit with a lot of the tariff increases, that the Supreme Court is going to make a decision in order to save the holidays. Okay? If it's done at all this year, I think the decision will come down sometime in December. All right? So don't count on that saving us. When I look at the spending forecasts from private companies, I looked at 3 of them. They didn't help me much. One is saying that we're going to have a 10% spending increase in the holidays. Another said we're going to have a 10% decline in holiday spending, and then the third said we're going to be flat. So it doesn't help me much. Okay, there's not a lot of data out there. I'm thinking about it, and the other thing that's happened is there's always a lot of people in America who shop early, okay? But the truth is that 50-some% at least of Americans are shopping, during, December, mid-December, something like that. And that's where a lot of the retail people get in. Anecdotally, I confess, I've been shopping. I'm almost done. I don't have many people to shop for.
Did you shop for me?
Okay. So, anyway, there may be a lot of you out there that are doing it. Why did I do it? Because I'm stingy. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to pay another 10% increase, in the end of November or whatever. I'm going to buy it now. So that's what I did. And the thinking is that there's a lot more people like me that have pre-shopped the holidays this year. And so the retail sales for the holidays have been front-loaded, meaning that you and I are done, and November and December, we're not going to be spending money. That's questionable. I don't know if I'm abnormal or not. Okay, but that's what another reason for worrying about consumer spending in the next 2 months. And the thing is that the investors and Wall Street are not going to take kindly to a disappointment this year in consumer spending. They're immediately going to go, oh my God, consumer spending, the last 2 months was terrible. It must mean the economy is going into the tube, sell, sell, sell. That could occur. I'm not sure. Anyway, so I would watch out for the next 2 months and just not assume that we're going to have all this holiday cheer.
Uh-oh. I guess I should start shopping for your gifts right now.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I wanted to tell you, we were talking about beef a week or 2 ago and the high prices of beef. And at the time I had said that even though the beef was at high prices, the ranchers were not benefiting from it. Okay. In fact, I said that beef prices that they were getting in auction had actually gone down 10% once Donald Trump had announced that he was going to reduce tariffs on Argentina in order to bring in more beef imports. He thought he was going to help the farmers, and instead, the meat producers and processors reduced the price they were willing to buy the beef by 10%. Anyway, the point is this, that guess what? The Trump administration over the weekend announced that they were going to investigate price fixing by the 4 companies that I had mentioned to you that controlled the meat packing processing business in the United States. And I had said to you that it was interesting to me that when the cattle ranchers came in to sell their beef, the prices from these 4 competitors were only a couple of pennies difference in each case. And I said, I wonder, as the cattle ranchers think, if there isn't price collusion. So I guess after this weekend, the government may agree with me. Maybe Donald Trump reads my column.
I think he does.
Huh.
Maybe he'll send a question in. Speaking
Yes.
of questions.
Speaking of, Dalton CTV at gmail.com. That's the place to send your questions on everything and anything. Dalton CTV at gmail.com. And until next week, sayonara.
Great. Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.